Hello and welcome to our webinar, Thinking about Empathy and Hijacking in Early Childhood Education, based on episode 39, Is it Empathy or Hijacking, from the podcast How Can I Say This by Beth Below. I'd like to open with an activity that will help you reflect on your current methods of expressing empathy. So, for example, if your friend were to say, I had such a tough time at my field placement today. The children didn't help clean up, even when I played the cleanup song. I'd like you to take a minute to think about how you would respond to this peer. One approach you may have considered is to offer a story of your own to the peer, recognizing a situation that you think is similar, and maybe your solutions and maybe how you felt in the moment. And this podcast is centered around that impulse. We connect with others through overlapping experiences and the intimacy and empathy that's formed when we share these moments. However, when we do so, we actually hijack the conversation, pulling the attention away from the person speaking to you onto yourself and your own stories. So this podcast asks us to instead try listening with compassion and without judgment, and to ask open ended questions to guide others to their own truth and wisdom. Because the fact is, you have never had an identical situation to anyone else on earth. Even similar sounding issues have different contexts and reasons that are tough and consequences. And so we should try and challenge ourselves to ask open ended questions until we find this point of departure, this point in which we notice that our stories are actually quite different. So now that I've given you a rundown of the podcast episode, we're going to try the activity from earlier again. There are two children here, Ash stacking some blocks, and Blake, another peer from the classroom. And Blake says, Ash took the blocks over there, and I don't want to play anymore. So I'd like you to reflect on what you think happened from only the information given here, and what you would like to say first. And please pause the video here so that you have time to think. So you may have made some assumptions about the situation that happened prior to Blake speaking to you, like maybe they just got into an argument, or maybe Blake was playing with the blocks first and Ash took them, or maybe Blake and Ash were playing together and then Ash decided to leave to go take some blocks away. And these assumptions that you make will shape the response that you give to the child that spoke to you, and potentially makes a situation that you think is similar to one you've experienced. Perhaps you believe this is a bullying situation and you want to say to the child what would have benefited you when you were bullied or something like that. But there are some responses that diminish and or assume Blake's feelings and the situation at hand, such as telling Blake, you're okay, go play with something else, go play with someone else, or that was mean, assuming that Ash is doing something mean spiritedly, or that happened to me once and I just drew pictures instead. And although these responses are trying to express empathy and trying to redirect the child, they actually diminish Blake's feelings and they make assumptions about Ash and Blake's intentions. For all we know, Blake could have been matter of factly stating a series of events and doesn't feel anything about it at all. We have no idea. So there are a few responses that aim to explore and aim to guide Blake to their own wisdom and truth, such as, what was happening just before that? Would you like to talk about it more? Or what would you like to do now?
Hi, my name is Kajol. Today I'm going to talk about responsive relationships moving from empathy to understanding. Responsive relationships are very important in early childhood education. They help children feel safe, respected, and valued. When children know that someone is listening and caring for them, they become more confident and willing to express their thoughts and feelings. The first step is active listening. Active listening means giving our full attention to the children. We listen carefully without interrupting and try to understand what they are saying before we respond. This shows children that their words are important. The second step is emotional validation. This means recognizing and accepting a child's feeling without judging them. For example, if a child is upset because they cannot play with a toy, instead of saying don't cry, we can say I can see that you are feeling sad. This helps children feel heard and understood. Another important part is curiosity and asking questions. We can encourage children to share their ideas by asking open ended questions like, can you tell me what happened? Or, how did that make you feel? This helps children express themselves and build trust. We also need to respect every children's experiences. Every child comes from different family, culture and background. Their experiences are unique and we should listen with an open mind and avoid making assumptions. As the message at the bottom of the slide says, listen, understand, respond. Before responding, we should first listen carefully and try to understand the child's feelings and needs. Finally, I would like to end with this quote. Empathy is not about saying, I know how you feel. It is about creating space for others to share their feelings. As educators, our goal is not only to teach children but also to build caring and respectful relationships where every child feels safe, accepted, and valued. Thank you.
How does learning happen connect? Belonging. How does learning happen emphasizes that children need to feel heard, valued, and respected in their relationships with educators and peers. When an educator hijacks a child's feelings by responding with their own experiences, the child may feel their emotions are being overlooked rather than understood. Instead, educators should remain present and attentive to the children's unique perspectives. An example, child says, I'm sad because my grandma is sick. Empathy hijacking would be saying, my grandma was sick too, let me tell you what happened. The how does learning happen approach would be, I'm sorry you're feeling sad. Would you like to tell me more about your grandma? This keeps the focus on the child and strengthens their sense of well-being. How does learning happen encourages educators to support children's emotional well-being by validating their feelings. Genuine empathy helps children develop emotional security because they know their emotions matter. Empathy hijacking can unintentionally invalidate those emotions by redirecting attention away from the child. One of how does learning happen in schools is to create environments where children feel safe expressing themselves. If adults consistently interrupt or compare children's experiences to their own, children may become less willing to share their thoughts and feelings. Active listening encourages children to continue expressing themselves confidently. Responsive relationships. How does learning happen describes educators, co-learners, and responsive listeners. Rather than assuming they know exactly how a child feels, educators observe, listen, ask questions, and respond thoughtfully. This mirrors the article's message that empathy is about staying curious instead of assuming someone's experiences is the same as your own. Reflection. How does learning happen reminds educators that every child's experience is unique. Instead of trying to relate by asking the conversation about ourselves, we build stronger relationships by listening, validating feelings, and allowing children to tell their own stories. This creates an environment where children feel respected, emotionally safe, and confident in expressing themselves. Key principles of belonging, well being, engagement, and expression.
The podcast, It is Empathy or Hijacking, by Beth Bolo, connects to early childhood education because empathy is an important part of creating strong and positive relationships with all children. As someone who is going to school for early childhood educator or people who are already early childhood educators, we interact with children during important moments where they are learning how to express their emotions, communicate their needs, and build relationships with others. This podcast helped highlight the importance of being fully present when someone is sharing their feelings. Sometimes Sometimes, when we try to relate to others, we may unintentionally shift the focus onto our own experiences instead of allowing the other person to feel heard. In an ECE setting, educators need to practice active learning and respond in ways that acknowledge and support the child's emotions. Using empathy allows children to feel safe, respected, and understood. It helps create a trusting relationship between the educator and a child while also supporting children's social and emotional development. These skills can also be applied when communicating with families and working collaboratively with other educators. And this is an example in practice. Instead of saying, I know how you feel, something similar happened to me, you can say, I can tell that this was important to you. Can you tell me more about how you're feeling? And if you'd like to share their own experiences and show that their feelings are being recognized and valued. Thank you.
To summarize, developing the habit of encouraging others to speak instead of hijacking with our own experiences builds responsive relationships by building trust and validating experiences. It shows a great deal of care for DEIB as it encourages us not to jump to conclusions and to instead consider other perspectives valuable, to find other people's life experiences to be a valid source of knowledge, and to include all different voices both in the classroom and as we connect with peers, parents, and the community. It also centers our practice on the foundations of how does learning happen, specifically belonging, well-being, and expression, as they rely on children feeling safe, secure, and heard, and being seen as capable co-learners who can teach us new ways of understanding the world. It also reflects an essential skill of early childhood educators, the ability to create engaging and safe learning environments built from those trusting relationships.